This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 7th of December 2021 at home in Wicklow. And it is an exploration and celebration of three great female works of art from very recent years. So I talk at length in a sort of interconnected way about two films and one book. The two films are Jennifer Fox's The Tale from 2018, Greta Gerwig's 2019 film version of Louise Mae Alcott's Little Women, and finally the book A Ghost in the Throat by the Irish bilingual poet Doireann Ni Ghriofa, which came out last year. These works, these female texts, are all in their own ways explorations of femininity, of womanhood, of sisterhood, and in some cases of motherhood. And they are powerful female visions. They are powerful demonstrations and iterations of female art making and truth telling and storytelling. And I'm a huge fan of all three. And the episode is a discussion of what constitutes a female text, and it's a discussion of what makes these works of art so good and so resonant, in my opinion. I also discuss my own perspectives of femininity, the upbringing I had, and how I continue to view women and the female what? The female entity, the female presence, the other half of the planet that I share existence with. And that's all. It's all coming up. It's a fat episode. There's a lot being said by me, and I try to honor those works and honor the female voice and honor female texts, and I hope you enjoy it. So get stuck in. I'll see you there real soon. Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind. Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. Welcome. How are you? Did you survive the old storm? That's right, Storm Dara descended on our little island and tore the shite out of the place. Pretty scary, in fairness. Luckily, where we were, not as bad as elsewhere. But I saw that damage was wreaked not too far from us and in other spots around the country. So anyway, I hope you stayed safe wherever you were, and we'll spare a thought for our friends across the Irish Sea, because they're next, I guess. So where to begin today? How about a little tale of heroism? My own heroism, thank you very much. Not yours, mine. So there I was. Last Friday, I'd gone out and retrieved Christmas trees from a dark field on a dark night and brought them back thinking I was a legend. And in I walked, proud as punch. But my wife was in a state of distress. Not undress, but distress. Which dress? Distress. Distress. And our little kitten, the marketing assistant, Ruby, had gone missing. She had somehow managed to escape the bounds of the house and was out at large on a stormy night. A lesser storm than Storm Dara, but a rough night nonetheless. The rain was falling and the wind was blowing and it was dark and cold, and my wife had been all around the place looking for her and no sign could she find. And then I came home and my wife was not pleased, very concerned about our little kitten, worrying about the kitten, worrying what she would tell our daughter the following morning. And so off I went and had a look out there in the dark with my little head torch, and I couldn't find her either. Now the older cat, Marlon, the head of marketing, she came out with me, not because she was looking for the kitten, because she doesn't really have much time for that kitten, but just for an evening stroll to use the facilities, so to speak. And as I was calling for the kitten, I could hear him meowling, and I wasn't sure. I thought, is that the old cat? Is that Marlon? And then I didn't hear it anymore. I went back into the house, and my wife was like, I'm sure I can hear her. I think she's down at the back, outside the back of the house. And so I went down that end, hopped over the fence. My wife met me there, and sure enough, we could hear the little mewling of the kitten. And I cast that little head torch around, and I looked up, and peeping over the edge of the shed, the large shed that sits on the property, peeping through the ivy leaves that are killing that wall, end gable wall of the shed, I saw two little eyes peeping back at me. And there was Ruby, cold and scared and shaking and mewling. And I leapt into action. I had no ladder. That didn't stop me. Up that wall I scaled. I couldn't find a foothold, but I managed to sort of hoist myself up by adhering to the wall, a la Spider-Man, gripping the ivy and wedging myself. There's a little telegraph pole there. I kind of wedged that. I had that at my back as I coated myself in creosote, just in case someone tried to set fire to me or wanted me. Actually, creosote would be flammable, wouldn't it? So rather, in case I was going to rot out there in the rain, the creosote was marking me as I clambered up, and I just couldn't quite get high enough to grab the kitten, and she was kind of taking a look at me and backing away and coming back to take a look. And then I finally thought, right, I can feel this ivy is not going to hold. So I went for one big grab. I caught her, sort of crushed her temporarily with my hand against the roof of the shed. And at that very moment, the ivy came away from the wall and I fell. And I fell hard, straight down. I didn't come away from the wall, I went straight down. My shoe came off, banged my foot, banged a finger, got a nice little adrenaline rush. But I had kept hold of the stray kitten, and she was clutched to my chest, probably terrified herself, but she was safe. And we had her back in the house in moments. As I limped my way through the house, I was, in my wife's eyes, a total legend. Not that she used that phrase. I was, in my wife's eyes, a hero. Not that she used that phrase either, but I know she felt it. Deep down in her core, I know she felt it. And I was pleased. I was pleased with myself. I was pleased to get the little kitten back. So there you go. Ruby was saved. The night was saved. And I have to say, I still don't quite feel right. I hurt my shoulder in the process of that little rescue mission. And maybe it was a bit of karmic retribution for taking those Christmas trees from that darkened field on a Wicklow hill. I don't know. As I said to my cousin, it feels a bit immoral to pay for Christmas trees. I've been so used to just grabbing them from nature all my life. Apart from the 10 years in Melbourne, to be fair, there weren't handy fields to raid. There weren't handy forests just there, in the backyard, so to speak. So trees were bought in the 10 years in Melbourne. But anyway, there you go. What can you do? So, this episode, I think it's going to be a corker. I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to doing it. And I did allude to it last week, and I'm just departing from my commitment to Christmas-themed episodes for December. Although in one of these works there's at least one, if not two, very lovely Christmas scenes. But I want to talk about three really brilliant, strong, original, interesting, vibrant, courageous works of female art. And yeah, this journey that I want to go on in this episode is really a discussion of the female voice. It's a discussion of female expression. It's a discussion of female stories. It's a discussion of women. It's a discussion of female creativity. It's a discussion of female artists and female expression. And it is a discussion of female erasure, and then art as a response to that erasure. And I'm going to sort of explore my own sort of relationship with how I have viewed women, from a young age, and how I've taken on, I suppose, certain perspectives or certain rhetoric about women. What I feel I've accepted as truth, what I feel I've incorporated into my own attitude to women, and yeah, I don't want to spare any kind of implication of my own prejudices, of my own blind spots, of I don't want to say misogyny, because I don't know, maybe I am guilty of misogyny. It's a pretty strong accusation to level at myself. I'd rather absolve myself of that one, but I think fundamentally we're all capable of that type of injustice, I suppose, in many different directions, not just towards women, but these sort of unconscious biases or inherited biases or cultural conditioned biases, and I suppose I'm willing to explore that in myself in the context of this discussion. So, where to begin? Let me just name the three texts to begin with. So, I'm going to be talking today about 2 movies and 1 book. Okay? So, the 2 movies are The Tale from 2018 by the director Jennifer Fox. So, The Tale is her movie and it's her story. She wrote and directed it, and it is a very confronting movie, and she really strips herself bare in the movie. Laura Dern plays a version of Jennifer Fox in the movie, and it's fundamentally an exploration of her own remembering of being sexually abused as a young teenager, and how she had stored that memory in a very particular place and sort of unremembered it or misremembered it, or she reframed it as something that it wasn't. And it's as I say, I mean, confronting, it's horrifying, but it's a ferociously brave piece of work, and it's a brilliant piece of cinematic storytelling, and she breaks the fourth wall and she plays with our expectations, and it is an exploration of memory. It's an exploration of identity, and it is a fearless exposure of herself. And I had read about it a little bit before I watched it, and I wasn't prepared for its power, even having read about it, when I sat down and watched it the first time. I watched it a second time before doing this podcast, just to sort of refresh my memory. It's not an easy film to watch, but such I suppose such kind of great directing by her, such amazing work by her kind of brave cast of actors. I'll go into the details in due course. But that is the first of the texts. The second one is Little Women from 2019, directed by Greta Gerwig, and she also wrote the screenplay, adapted the screenplay from Louise Mae Alcott's beloved book of the same name, Little Women. And I first watched Little Women last year, and I was so enamoured of it that I had to sit down the following night and watch it again. I found myself bewitched by it, and my my cousin here at #blessed, we were having a laugh, because it seems my admission of this enormous admiration of this movie seems to open me to accusations of closeted homosexuality. That seems to be the running joke, that I must be gay on some level if I'm liking Little Women so much. I mean, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, I took it in the spirit it was meant. It was not meant in any viciously homophobic way. I was going to throw in that disclaimer quickly, but I don't know. Is Little Women a chick flick? I'm going to discuss that in due course as well. I think it is an extraordinarily beautiful piece of work. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of Greta Gerwig as an actress, but the two movies that she has directed to date, Lady Bird and Little Women, I think are fantastic. And what she achieved with Little Women, she sort of integrated Louise Mae Alcott's own story and made decisions about how to present the events of the book. And it's beautifully shot and beautifully costumed and designed. And it's, some of the sort of the mise en scène, some of the scenes, they're absolutely painterly, and it's just a beautiful looking film, and it's beautifully acted. And I don't know if I'm responding to it. I watched it again recently with my daughter, and my wife watched it. It was her second time to see it as well, and yeah, I was no less bewitched than the first couple of times I watched it. I don't know if I'm responding to it because I'm the father of a daughter. My daughter's only 8. I think she'll appreciate that film more as she ages. But I think Greta Gerwig did an astonishing job with it. And as a sort of as a pin to emerging female independence and this striving for an assertive female identity, and the wrestle with the assigned female roles at that time. It's set during the time of the American Civil War, so in the 1800s, and the protagonist, really the person I think we're invited to identify with most is Jo March, the one of the 4 daughters who are the Little Women of the title. And she is the sort of the firebrand, she is the writer, and she's kind of the proxy for Louise Mae Alcott, and just brilliantly incandescently performed by Saoirse Ronan with such accessible, palpable, emotional yearning and honesty and openness and believability. I just think she's a fantastic actress. Okay, that's the second text. We're going to come back to that. The third text is a book that was published last year, and it is called A Ghost in the Throat by the bilingual Irish poet Doireann Ni Ghriofa, published by Tramp Press, a great independent Irish publisher. And I had first come across Doireann Ni Ghriofa, I think through kind of social media. I'd see her name crop up and I'd stumble across her poems. I'd heard a couple of interviews with her, and I don't know how she came on my radar. I think I like her name. I think that was the first thing I saw. I liked the name. And last year, obviously, when the book came out, she was promoting it a lot, and her name was popping up a lot, and the book was popping up a lot. And I finally got my hands on a copy a few months ago and started reading it. And I found it absolutely brilliant. I only finished it recently. I didn't sit down and hit it in one sitting, just with my various commitments. I haven't been a great reader in recent years, but I really wanted to persevere with this. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I loved her voice. I loved her honesty. And really, really what the book is, it's kind of a detective story in a way, because it's her exploration of there's a famous, well, it wasn't famous to me, it was my first time to really come across it. It certainly wasn't a poem I'd studied when I was in school, but there's a famous Irish poem called Cuoine Art Illyri, which is basically the keening for Arthur O'Leary. So Cuoine Art Illyri. Cuoine is the Irish word for crying, but it's, we translate it as it sounds, as keening. Now keening is a bit more specific than just crying, because keening is when women grieve the death of a loved one. Like, this is an old sort of Irish cultural tradition, I suppose. And the image that comes to my mind always is, widows and mothers dressed in their widow's weeds, dressed in black shawls, fundamentally howling their grief to the world over the death of a loved one. And that's keening. It's a much more evocative, powerful word. But Cuoine Art Illyri it's a lengthy poem of 36 verses that was written in Irish by an Irish noblewoman in the 1700s. Her name is Eileen Dove Ní Chonaill, and her story was she fell in love with this dashing man who apologized to no one. He was a sort of a fearless, kind of swaggering type who I feel, from how Doireann Ni Ghriofa has explored the story, that it was a very sort of lustful physical attraction and a fierce attraction of like-minded characters, fiery characters. And he made enemies. He made an enemy of the wrong man, and he was fundamentally assassinated, shot down, and shot off his horse. And his horse found its way back to Eileen Dove, and she saw that it was covered in blood, and she jumped on the horse, and the horse led her back to her fallen lover, and she found him there, shot to bits, and jumped down on top of his body and commenced drinking handfuls of his blood, and then wrote the poem Cuoine Art Illyri. And the poem was her grief cry, her love cry, her rage cry, her condemnation of the murderers, those lesser men, and in particular the man who commissioned his assassination. And it's a kind of a ferocious, visceral lament and exploration of her love and her desire and her grief and her rage. And she was pregnant with their third child at the time of his death. And Doireann Ni Ghriofa, the poet, she was also was she pregnant at the time of writing? I'm not sure, but she was certainly going through a very challenging period of motherhood. The baby that was born around the time of her doing this, writing this amazing book, had been born premature and very vulnerable, and was in the neonatal intensive care unit in a hospital, and she was waiting to be given permission to take her baby home. And fundamentally, she kind of found this sort of connection of the vulnerable mother, and she found a connection of mother love, and a connection of sacrifice, and the sort of the altruistic sacrificing of self to save another. Now, in Eileen Dove's case, of course, she didn't manage to save her man, although you could argue that his saving to posterity in her poem is a saving of a kind. And really, when I referred to the idea of the book being sort of a detective story, Doireann Ni Ghriofa really reveals how she became obsessed with uncovering the full story of Eileen Dove Ní Chonaill, what happened to her afterwards, where are the historical records of the rest of her life, what happened to her. And she interweaves the story with her own reckoning of her own sort of womanhood and femininity and motherhood, and she incorporates the sort of the pedestrian mundanities of the mothering life, of running around after little kids and cleaning up after them and doing the dishes and washing clothes and leaving unfinished cups of tea and coffee around the place, and being knackered, wrecked all the time, and breastfeeding, and also part of her story was expressing milk to donate to other mothers, and so she was in this, I don't know, I mean, I think the way I received it or read it was, she was almost in this kind of fugue state of incessant, nursing, milking, mothering, tending, minding, caring. And to me, as as an ever aspiring sort of creator and writer and communicator, I was marveling at the fact that throughout this, she began this kind of amazing journey of trying to create this work of art, this sort of auto-fiction exploring her own life, going back in time, being a dogged investigator of every record she could find, every archive she could find, to uncover more information about Eileen Dove and fill out the picture, fill in the empty spaces. And for me, when I think then of these three great texts that I feel I've responded to very strongly, I mean, on a fundamental level, they're all explorations of femininity. They're all explorations of womanhood, of sisterhood, of motherhood. And they all, in their own way, are dealing with this idea of erasure and of... and when I say erasure, they're talking about social erasure, like, women, not being allowed to occupy certain spaces in society, economic erasure as a consequence of that, which will be a theme of Little Women. One of the sisters is convinced, look, she can't choose a career, she has to marry into money to find economic security. Historic erasure becomes a bit of an obsession for Doireann Ni Ghriofa in A Ghost in the Throat, because she finds that other members of Eileen Dove's family, her brothers, there are records of their lives and, their exploits and their successes and failures and their deaths and the stories of their male children. But again, she's like, where's Eileen Dove's record? She's been erased. There's sexual erasure in Jennifer Fox's The Tale. And this is an interesting one. This is what makes that such a complex story, because Jennifer Fox herself, as her way of dealing with the trauma, erased the reality of that experience. She erased the fact that she was so young, that effectively the sexual relationship she was having with this man was rape, and she was being groomed and manipulated and seduced in an extraordinarily sinister way. And then there's cultural erasure. And the cultural erasure, I think, arguably is the reductive attitude that can be encountered when people talk about women's literature or women's fiction or female writers, or that idea of like a chick flick. I mean, I remember really, really enjoying Silver Linings Playbook, the David O. Russell movie, which is, it must be about 10 years old now, and it's kind of a comedy drama, and the two central characters are a man and a woman with serious mental health problems, and they're using medication to cope. They're both dealing with trauma of different sorts. One's played by Bradley Cooper, the girl's played by Jennifer Lawrence, and ultimately it becomes a love story, and it's a story of recognition and how they sort of find each other and how they sound each other out and how they try to make it happen. And it's very romantic, but it's fun and it's very well acted, and I really like it. I'm happy to go back to it. But I remember saying it to a friend, a male friend. I was living in Australia at the time, and he claimed to be, a big movie buff. He loved old movies, but he was totally dismissive of it. Chick flick. And I was like, really? Is that a chick flick? I mean, I was thinking, like, why is it a chick flick? Because it's kind of emotional. Is it as reductive as that? In fact, I messed up. I meant to do a bit of research. I forgot to do a bit of research into is it the Bechdel test? Isn't that test whereby you can determine whether a movie qualifies as a chick flick? Because certain things have to happen in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie about sort of, female characters that appear or what they talk about. Anyway, I forgot to look it up to clarify that, but you can look at that yourself. I mean, chick flick. I mean, that, it's a reduction, isn't it? And so when we reduce something, we are actively deciding to erase complexity. I mean, this is a running theme of the stuff I talk about on the podcast. But, that kind of reductive approach, sure, look, it's this. It's about women, so it's going to be about this. It's going to be about feelings, and it's going to be about, I don't get enough of this, or I want to assert my this, or I want to assert my that, or it's about nobody loves me, or it's about whatever. And that's totally reductive, and it erases the full picture. It erases the full complexity, and it erases individuality. It erases it erases that idea of sovereign individuality. Like, all women are this is what they're concerned with. And of course that's a two-way street. I certainly feel like when I was in my late teens, early to mid 20s, I encountered a lot of rhetoric from women I knew, which was fundamentally, all men are this, all men are that, all men think with that friend of theirs that lives between their legs. And I used to always kind of bristle a bit at it. I mean, like, I understood what they were saying, but I felt, well, I didn't recognize those traits in myself, and I judged that rhetoric pretty harshly, and just as I would have been critical of myself if I endorsed the idea that all women are this, and the reductive rhetoric that certain male friends might come out with. And I just felt from a very young age, I just didn't have an issue with this idea that women had been relegated and eradicated in many ways throughout history. And it wasn't like I was growing up. I mean, my mother, I think, has pretty solid feminist credentials, and she was the only woman in the house. I grew up with 3 brothers, no sisters. So it was a house of men and a mother. And I don't think my mother was exceptional. I would argue that many Irish mothers were strong characters, particularly women that came of age in the in the 60s, who would have been coming up at a very politicized time, who would have been educated and articulate and very much in tune with those that early wave of feminism and a changing kind of social and political landscape, and particularly in Ireland with, I suppose, I feel like that generation of Irish men and women were the ones who, started having families in the late 60s, early 70s. They were the ones that sort of broke the Catholic yoke on Irish values and kind of Irish piety, and like the hypocrisy and the repression of the Catholic institutions in Ireland. That generation of Irish people, not all of them, of course. I mean, there were people who were very much on side, I suppose, but there were people who were sort of the liberators, or the social, the social outliers, or rebels. And I mean, my parents were, they were hippies, moderate hippies. I always feel. They weren't in the kind of the tree hugging camp, as far as I know. I haven't heard any of those stories, but they were politically aware and politically awake. And I don't know. I mean, the point I'm trying to get to is there were prevailing attitudes in my house that it was just, I just felt it was understood. I didn't feel I was being preached at by my mother. I wouldn't say my father has massively feminist credentials, but he certainly knew how to behave, I suppose. Let's put it that way. But I certainly grew up with a sense, I don't know, I think I grew up with a sense that I didn't hesitate to believe that there had been injustice. I didn't hesitate to believe that women had a hard time. And I don't know if that was informed by the movies that I was watching, or how I perceived women in movies, or how I perceived the adult women in my life. Because certainly, my mother and the adult women who came into the house, I felt, I think I was fond of all of them. I felt they were all strong characters. They were all interesting characters. They were all loud. they were all loud characters, and sure, why wouldn't they be? These were women, as I say, who would have been, growing up in coming of age in the 60s, starting families in the 70s, and yeah, they were vibrant and attractive and unashamed, and I was like, yeah, cool, that's what women are. And it was all good. It was all good with me. And in that, I'm trying to contextualize my attitude here, because I feel, in recent times, there's been, there's kind of pushback and backlash, with whatever wave of feminism there is now, and maybe it's become a bit confused or watered down by woke politics and culture wars and identity politics. And you maybe have somebody like the Canadian academic and thinker, psychologist Jordan Peterson, who's arguing that no, there's no social injustice. Women just needed to assert themselves more, which I just think, God, it's just so disingenuous. I kind of go, are you serious? Just not accepting that there were, institutions of power and gatekeepers, and there were, cliques and, male corridors of power and male structures of power that were absolutely built on exclusivity and the excluding women and excluding people of color, or excluding people of certain, of certain religious persuasion or whatever. I don't hesitate to validate any of that. I think history backs that up. And so then you look at someone like Louise Mae Alcott, and you think, well, she was an early suffragettist, and she was a feminist, and she was an educator, and she was a writer, and she was an independent woman. And I go, that was all against the tide of fashion, against the tide of expectation, and against the tide of ascribed roles. And like, that's a thing, isn't it? Like socially, the ascription of roles and the ascription of meaning and the ascription of significance. And who was doing the ascribing? And historically, if we're looking at kind of, the last couple of 100 years or more in the Western world, we're talking about men kind of going, no, this is your role, this is our role. And that, again, is a form of erasure, and it's a misdistribution or an inequality of power. And I think, again, if we're looking at the connective tissue of these three texts that I'm talking about today, they are all searches or quests for identity, and they're all searches and quests for meaning and understanding, and they all speak to a recognition of earlier models, of earlier exemplars, and they all speak to recognition of earlier pain, or earlier struggle, or earlier rage. And these artists, so Jennifer Fox and Greta Gerwig and Doireann Ni Ghriofa, they have created these brilliantly distinct works that make those experiences and make those quests and make that recognition so visceral and so palpable. And they are, of course, of different tones and of different modes. But the connective tissue is, they are all female texts. And, this is something that Doireann Ni Ghriofa returns to again and again and again. It's one of the great kind of themes of A Ghost in the Throat, is what is a female text. And I think it's the poet in her that takes her into viewing so many aspects of her life and her experience and what she's reading about Eileen Dove as female texts. So maybe even the rings of the abandoned teacups or coffee cups, like that's a female text, abandoned because a mother is tending to her children. Maybe the spilled food on the floor is a female text. She refers to a beautiful cardigan made by her mother for one of her children, and that each stitch is a female text. She refers to her own body, the scars from her cesarean deliveries, as female texts. The lines on her face, under her eyes, the bags, the fatigue, as female text. It's brilliant. I love it. I just find it really evocative, and it's deeply personal for Doireann Ni Ghriofa, because it is a work of autofiction. It is her imposing a narrative on her own story and imposing this amazing narrative on her own interiority and her own exploration of her sexuality, her changed status, and by which I mean her changed status from non-mother to mother, from non-mother wife to mother wife. And her husband features in it throughout in peripheral but not unimportant stories. In fact, there's one of the stories that she shares in the book that I really loved, and it really didn't directly have anything to do with her quest for meaning or the research into what happened to Eileen Duffney Connell. But she was relaying the story of herself and her husband being in the car one night coming back from a night out, and there's a clear suggestion that they're feeling like a physical sort of desire for each other, and then they come across this car crash in the road, and there's a couple of cars stopped, there's people standing around, and she sees a woman lying in the road in the glare of the headlights. And they stop the car, and she instinctively just jumps out of the car, and her husband is basically telling her to stop, like, don't get involved. And she runs over to the fallen woman and sort of tends to her and tries to reassure her and brings her up off the road and comforts her. And, it goes on this little journey of pure, instinctive, impulsive, active solidarity, because that is the only other woman in that space, in that moment. There's men standing around not looking after her, and she just goes no, like a force that wasn't going to be stopped. And it was her mothering force and her nursing force that was driving it. And she gets back in the car and puts the seatbelt back on, and it's clear that the husband is kind of furious and thinking she's just put herself in danger being out in the road. More cars are going to come, and Ni Ghriofa sort of admits feeling, she admits feeling that kind of sting of her, and maybe a sting of guilt perhaps at her husband's anger, but also like, feck off with yourself kind of thing, that she's not going to apologise for her sisterly act. And they drive on and go home, and it's just brush teeth and go to bed and go to sleep. And I found that really moving. I don't know why. I found it really moving. There was something about her great act of sort of empathy and care and altruism, and sacrificing herself a bit, sacrificing the potential night with her husband, potentially sacrificing herself, putting herself into that dangerous situation. I don't know. I found it admirable and touching and moving. But what? That's just one episode from the book. I don't know what that. I mean, I suppose the connection Ni Ghriofa was making with that moment was maybe it was an echo. And I mean, echo, this idea of echoes through time. It was an echo of her tending to that fallen body, that victim of an accident, that person laid low on the ground and vulnerable, and potentially someone who's close to death. That was the echo was with Eileen Dove leaning over her fallen man and tending to him, and this is what this is one of the things that was resonating with her. And so, that was the point I was making, the idea of recognition of something from before, recognition of earlier experience, an earlier female experience. So there's an artistic solidarity, but never mind the artistic. It's a female solidarity. It's continuing the chain, and I think Ni Ghriofa would argue it's continuing the text. It's continuing the telling of the female story. And look, I'm going to digress here for a moment, because I don't want to. I mean, I said I'd explore my own complicity in female erasure. And I was reminding myself several years ago on my website, I wrote a piece which was called No Fixed Address. And the theme of the piece was I was trying to kind of explore this idea of where we live, and not in terms of bricks and mortar, not in terms of the houses or apartments we inhabit, but rather what existential space do we live in? And I came up with this idea that I was kind of stripping myself back and thinking my own existential bent was towards striving. That I was a striver, striving for meaning, striving for understanding. And probably, there was definitely an implication of artistic and philosophical striving there. And probably, I was probably trying to kind of ennoble myself. And, I'm just going to say here, when I when I write pieces for the website, it is a moment of artistic expression. So I never see them as permanent truths. I never see them as a permanent reflection of my, of my thinking, of my thought. I see them as that's where my head was at that moment. And for me, that's the artistic reality. And that's the expression of something then in that moment that's real. And that's the offer. That's the offer to connect with a reader. That's the offer to connect with an audience in that moment. And I have written subsequently on the website, and I've kind of gone, I don't look back at my pieces and try to correct them. I don't look back with shame. I don't look back and cringe. I think I was saying I do look back and sometimes cringe, but I'm not going to edit. I'm not going to correct and redress, because it was a moment. It was a moment of truthfulness then, and I'll let it stand. And I know in my thinking, I was thinking of that specific post that I just referred to, because when I said about myself, my active mode, my active existential mode is striving, I then referred to my wife. And I was like, I think maybe my wife's existential mode is caring. And at the time, in that moment, she'd been a mother for a year, so we'd been parents for a year. And maybe that's what was dominating my perception of my wife. But I kind of subsequently, over the years, I've kind of, that's always niggled at me. And I felt, Jesus, was that an act of erasure? Was that me ascribing narrative and significance to my wife's core state in a public forum, and kind of going, yeah, my wife, she's a great little wifey, she's a great little mammy, and she looks after our baby, and she's a great carer. That's what she does. She's very caring, and she cares about her family, she cares about her sisters, and she cares about her brother and her mammy and daddy, and she's a great worrier and a carer. And I just I was sort of castigating myself internally. And I think I have done over the years. I've stumbled over that. It just props up in my subconscious. I'm like, oh, right, there it is again. And I'm asking myself now, did in that ascription of my wife's existential bent as caring, I think I just reduced her to something that completely disregarded these other aspects of her personality that are no less important, that are perhaps more important. And I ask myself now, did I erase her own striving? Did I erase her own desire to make meaning of her life? My wife is an artist. She's a musician. She's a singer. She's a songwriter. She's now a music therapist. And at that time, a year into being a mother, she was embarked on a master's of music therapy. She was studying, she'd gone back to education to do a postgrad, a really demanding course, being a mother. She was unwell after she became a mother, and there were some very scary health moments. And she got back up on her feet and went back and studied and was still being a great mother. And I was like, she's caring. I was like, oh my God. She was kicking ass, and in spite of her fears, and in spite of kind of a mortal existential wound that she'd endured because of a difficult pregnancy, because of a traumatic childbirth, because of becoming very ill after our daughter arrived. In spite of all of that, carrying that weight and carrying that collateral damage, and the internal pressure that she was living with, as well as having, a husband in myself, doing my best to be, trying to be a good father, trying to learn how to be a good father, just as she was trying to learn to be a good mother. But also maybe like a lot of new fathers at a certain point in that journey, kind of going, what about me? I'm still a man with needs, and I still love you, and I've still got my desires and my longings. And like that, another aspect of pressure that my wife had to endure. And in all of that, she's going out and over the subsequent years completed her master's, did really well, and went back out into the working world, having had a long career as a professional musician and as an original, songwriter and artist, and going, no, I'm going to do a pivot, and I want to go into music therapy, and I want to, pursue that craft and that service and that identity. And that was all happening in front of my eyes. And I came up with caring. And I kind of go, I don't know. I mean, and this is, I mean, I'm asking myself now, is this a male-female divide? And so what I was seeing was a woman, a new mother, reprioritizing and going, this is my focus, to take care of my baby as best I can. And I'm also going to, pursue a new career and re-educate myself, because this long-term will be better for the family and better for my baby in the future. And so she was reprioritizing and deprioritizing herself, because maybe there was a part of her that was still like, no, I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, and I still want to pursue that. And she made a decision. And similar in a way to I mentioned earlier, Jennifer Fox in The Tale, she committed an act of self-erasure. She erased her true sort of the victimhood of her younger self. She erased that from her narrative until she was forced to confront it later in life. And that's what the film explores and goes into with tremendous honesty, is that crisis of, oh my God, this is what actually happened. And I don't know, like, in that case, there's, and I referred to it earlier, that act of erasure was about self-preservation, because that was an act of erasure to sort of hermetically seal trauma and keep it at a safe distance. So she locked it into a particular memory, and she explores the unreliability of that memory in that story. And that, I suppose, that is not an exclusively female experience. I mean, anyone who is trying to, repress trauma or damage or horror from their lives, you don't have to be female to go on that journey. But that is what Jennifer Fox did, or it seems that's what she certainly portrays to us in that movie, and Laura Dern plays her so well. Laura Dern, incidentally, also in Little Women as the mother of the girls. I mean, Laura Dern is having a major kind of moment. She was also in Marriage Story in 2019. Didn't she get an Oscar for that, as the very aggressive lawyer who represents Scarlett Johansson's divorcing wife at the expense of poor old Adam Driver. But anyway, that's a digression. So, I mean, just to kind of return to my wife for a second, and my own I don't know, like, well, do I look at that and go, that was a blind spot? Do I look at that and go, this is a very male thing to do? So, the male mind is, I'm not going to, and this speaks back to Doireann Ni Ghriofa's unfinished cups of tea and coffee. The male mind is, no, I'm not going to not finish my coffee. I'm going to finish my coffee, and then I'll get to my daughter after I finish my coffee. And don't get me wrong, my daughter's 8 now, so I'm not talking, when she was a baby, that wouldn't have been my process. But I'm just looking at that. I've asked myself these questions. I've explored these, these choices, or these modes of behavior, or these, the male frame and the female frame. And, is that, and you can hear me hesitating here. I'm hesitating because, like, what the hell do I know? What do I know? I'm not a woman. I'm not a mother. So this is pure speculation on my part. It's pure conjecture. But, I've observed my wife closely because, of course, I love her and I care about her. And it hasn't been, her motherhood journey hasn't been that easy. And I think part of what she found challenging, and this is probably true for many mothers who maybe become mothers a little bit later in life, which is, more and more a trend these days, that there is an erasure of identity and a loss of the pre-mother self. And then it's, how then do you reconcile past self with new self? How do you recover or reclaim the woman you thought you were with the woman you are now? And then there's also into the mix and I mean, I did touch on this, I have touched on this before, this idea of, of the public mother, of the performative mother, of the social media mother, and mother shaming, and then mother guilt. I'm a bad mother. And I mean, that's something that I heard Doireann Ni Ghriofa refer to in, maybe she didn't use that phrase exactly, but maybe it was a bad parent or failing, or she was being interviewed by Roisin Ingle. And in fact, I think I'll throw in a link to, there was a great podcast. Roisin Ingle was interviewing her about a ghost in the throat around a year ago on an Irish Times podcast. And she's a great speaker. She's again, just that kind of authenticity and her openness, her honesty, her frankness, her self-deprecation, just a really attractive character. And the few poems of hers that I've come across, I've really liked. And I'll give a shout out. She has a new collection of poetry out at the moment. But that idea of mother guilt, I feel I recognise that, and I've seen that. I've seen it in my own wife. I've seen it in other female friends that I know. And I always try to challenge it in terms of, I'm not trying to invalidate what their experience is or what their feeling is, but I just think, here, listen, come on now. The idea that, the idea that you can be shamed or feel this sense of I've failed because of the pressure to be, an uber mum. And the same way as a dad. I mean, I've spoken frankly about my own failings as a father, or what I feel are my, my weak areas, my kind of my fissures, and cracks in my fathering performance, or my fathering role, or how I interact with my daughter at times. I'm aware that we all fail, and I kind of go, do I feed that sense of failure with guilt? And let's be fair, it's not a particularly male dynamic, is it? I mean, and that's the point. So we're getting back to, where's the male text that says you're a crap father? Where's the male text that says we're all bad fathers? And it's not really out there in the way that the female text is out there in everyday life of, the tut-tut-tuts of, oh, look at her not being a good mother. And that is something that women take on, I guess. And the way that so many ascribed roles to women are taken on, because society says, you have to be this. You have to retain your beauty. You have to retain your sexuality. You have to retain your dignity. You have to retain, so many things that society says this is what you should be. And then, you become a mother, and that experience, you've actually given away your life force. You've given, women give away their life force to create this other being. And there's a chemical, biological, what's the right word? I mean, it's, it's a force, isn't it? It's a chemical, biological, gravitational force that is monstrous and beautiful and irresistible. And I don't think it's something that men can actually relate to. I mean, intellectually, I can understand it. But, I have, I have my own, what I would maybe put in a similar category, my feelings about my daughter. But I recognise it can't possibly be the same. She hasn't come out of my body. I haven't lost myself, by contributing to her conception. And I haven't carried her through the 9 months of pregnancy, and I haven't had my body altered and changed. It's a different thing. I mean, you can't. you can't shilly-shally around that. It's like, call a spade a spade. So what I'm saying, I suppose, is that I take my hat off to the mothers, and I take my hat off then to the artists who express that or explore that. And certainly it's central to Doireann Ni Ghriofa's A Ghost in the Throat. And it's maybe less central in a way in Little Women. It's less central in the tale, although there is the exploration of Jennifer Fox's relationship with her mother, brilliantly played by Ellen Burstyn, who I suppose and in fact I can't think of the actress's name who plays her as the younger mother in the flashbacks, but portrayed as maybe a sort of, slightly emotionally unavailable mother as a younger mother. But there's certainly guilt on Ellen Burstyn's part as the mother to the adult Jennifer Fox in the movie. But I think speaking of guilt again, like, I think the idea that I find myself resisting is that if this sense of guilt is coming from other people, so if you're a mother and you feel like other mothers are going to shame you or judge you, or if the feeling of the feeling of guilt is from a sense of social expectation, or a sense of this historically high bar that's handed down to women once they've become mothers, I just think, get all of that crap out of your head and clear a path for a motherhood of your own making. And again, this is all, when I make statements like this, I'm not talking about extreme scenarios or wild dysfunction or abuse, or I'm just talking about, I think there's a mean, there's an average, and that's what I'm speaking to. It's tough enough. It's tough enough trying to do a good job without adding to the burden, without throwing guilt into the mix. I'm just like, feck off with that. Come on now. Just you're doing your best, and you don't need to listen to any of that stuff. And I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that looks like. If that requires, an articulation of that commitment in some way. But then I look at these works of art and I go, they're an articulation. They're an articulation of female power. They're an articulation of female voice and female expression. And they're going, look, this is what happened. Look, this is what it's like. Look, this is how it feels. And of course, two of them, the tale obviously, and A Ghost in the Throat, they have that autobiographical aspect to them. And Little Women, it's a work of fiction, and it's a beloved, I think mostly pitched as a sort of a children's book, really, is it? And it's not like I was a huge fan of Little Women. as a child, I was aware of its existence. That was it, nothing else. And then in 1994, the Australian filmmaker Gillian Armstrong did her version of Little Women, and it was a sort of a stellar cast. Susan Sarandon as the mother, Winona Ryder as Jo March, Claire Danes was in it, Kirsten Dunst as the young Amy, played as an older woman by Samantha Mathis, Trini Alvarez, Gabriel Byrne was in it, Eric Stoltz, who am I missing? Christian Bale as Laurie, the doofus next door, the fop. I have to say, that's the one aspect of Greta Gerwig's version that I find myself resisting. I'm a little bit out on Timothée Chalamet. I don't know. He can't seem to disguise or mask his modernity, like his body language in Little Women. It doesn't seem to fit like his you know, his deportment, um his posture, the way he walks, he just looks like he's slumping and slouching and loping through a mall in LA, and I find it really irritating. Now he kind of played to type in Lady Bird, and I must say I was quite taken with Call Me by Your Name, the sort of the gay coming of age movie set in a beautiful Italian setting. And I just watched him recently in Dune, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and he was quite good in that. But I do have the sense, I mean, there's always a new actor or a new actress who is the actor or actress of the moment. And he is definitely that actor at the moment. And I'm just like, all I'm seeing is a skinny, Byronic, floppy-haired fop. And he's got a bit of a moody thing, and a bit of a sort of a sensual thing. But I'm waiting to see the chops. I'm waiting to see the acting chops. Like, he's just a pretty thing at the moment, and I don't find him that interesting from an acting point of view. Although he is, I have to, I as I say, in Call Me by Your Name, he's quite a lovely character. And then, I don't know, like a female equivalent. I mean, there's a young Australian actress, she's in her late 20s, early 30s now, Elizabeth Debicky, who was in Steve McQueen's Widows, and she was good in that. And she is in The Tale, Jennifer Fox's The Tale, as the riding instructor that the young Jennifer Fox goes to for her riding lessons and stays with. And that's how she meets the running coach, who's an older man, and it's him that seduces her, and he is, I mean, I suppose chillingly played. I mean, he's not, he's not portrayed as a monster, and this is the thing. This is what's so powerful and effective about The Tale. He is played unnervingly by Jason Ritter, the son of the late John Ritter, as a really warm, gentle, attractive character. And like, we're seeing him through the young Jennifer Fox's eyes, and refracted through the Elizabeth Debicki character as well, who he is sleeping with. But he's presented as being just this attractive, very sort of seductive character. And of course, that's what he does. He seduces the young Jennifer Fox, and she's only 13. And, again, some very confronting scenes are presented. And the young Jennifer Fox is played brilliantly by a young Canadian actress, Isabelle Nellis. An astonishing performance. And just to recall the idea of erasure and sexual erasure, when Jennifer Fox confronts the man later in life, he's an older man, played for that one scene by John Hurd, famously the father of Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, and in that very tense scene in the movie when Laura Dern, as Jennifer Fox, confronts him, he goes in for a kiss, and it's awful, because she's like, no, like, I know who you are, I know what you did, I remember, and he's been honoured at some public event, and she confronts him, and it's a really awkward, horrible, uncomfortable scene, and he just denies everything. That didn't happen, it didn't happen, and again, what you're looking at there then is his erasure, he's actively trying to erase her truth, but then you're looking at him, the character, and thinking, okay, has he actually erased what he did? Has he normalized it in his head? And she was probably one of many. And has he placed that memory in a certain place as well? I didn't do anything wrong. It was the 70s. Everybody was doing it. It was a time of looser sexual mores and all the rest. But yeah, again, just a great cast. And speaking of great casts, go to Little Women, and brilliantly cast. And as I said earlier, Saoirse Ronan is the driving force of that movie. in terms of what we see on screen, I guess, Greta Gerwig, it's her vision, and it's a beautiful vision. And some of those scenes, like the scene on the beach, it's like, they're like impressionist paintings. The scene of Amy and Laurie leaving Paris, and you see the grand house and the grand garden in the background, just stunning, like beautiful. But again, a great cast. You have Emma Watson and Eliza Scanlon and Florence Pugh making up the rest of the sisters. So yeah, really well done, really well done. The men in that movie, Chris Cooper doing a lot with very little. You get older actors and they just knock it out of the park. Yeah, I'm trying to think who else from the French guy, I don't know his name, plays the love interest for Jo March. He's quite a charming character, very French, just very frank and outspoken and matter of fact. Some very funny scenes ensue as a result of that. Bob Odenkirk as the dad, and Meryl Streep, not a man. Meryl Streep just doing that great Meryl Streep work that she does, as the kind of rather severe and cranky rich aunt who chooses her favourites amongst the daughters and plays with their affections, with the promise of financial return. So I don't know what the conclusion is to all this. I suppose, can I return to the idea of what is a female text? And I don't know. I mean, part of me is like, these are just great stories. They're just great stories told brilliantly by brilliant women. And why wouldn't you be interested? What's a male text? Is Philip Roth, who I've read a lot of, Ernest Hemingway, Henry Miller, are they male texts? Vladimir Nabokov, is he a writer of male texts? Does it become very gendered? Does it become very sexual? I don't know, but female text. Are we talking about filmmakers like the French director Catherine Breillat? Are we talking about Jane Campion? Are we talking about Gillian Armstrong? Are we talking about female writers like Louise Mae Alcott? Are we talking about Irish female writers like Patricia Scanlon or Anne Enright or Maeve Binchy? Are we talking about the classic English writers, like Jane Austen or the Brontes? A female text. I mean, my position is, why wouldn't you be interested if it's a story told well, if it's an expression of something real, and if it is a great piece of art? Why would you not be interested? What does it matter if you're male? What does it matter if you're straight, if you're gay, if you're young, if you're old? If you like art, if you like truth presented in art, if you like to be taken on that journey, why would you not be as interested in a female text as a male text? Why would you not be as interested in a gay text or a white text or a black text? Whatever. It doesn't matter, does it? I mean, maybe we need to get past all of this, but for me it's a no-brainer, and I am interested, and I will continue to be interested, and I don't want great art to be missed out on. And I heartily recommend these 3 fantastic female texts that I've been speaking about today. Doireann Ni Ghriofa asks the question in her book. She asks the question, would Eileen Dovney Connell's amazing poem, Cuina Artha Lira, would it be more remembered? Would it be more sanctified? Would it be more canonical? Would it enjoy more prominence, more literary acclaim if it had been written by a man? And, that might be rhetorical, but I feel, she's probably right. She doesn't bang on about it. That's not the axe she is wielding. That's not the axe she has to grind. And I don't come away from a ghost in the throat going, oh man, Doireann Ni Ghriofa, she's got issues. I don't feel that at all. She's great. I love her through this piece of work and really admire what she's achieved with it. But yeah, it really, it's her. She's driving that question explicitly. What is a female text? And she sees a female text everywhere. And a female text to her, fundamentally, this is what I come away with. A female text is where women live, where women leave their mark. That's a female text. And all we need to do is open our eyes and look for it and appreciate it, value it, recognize it, see it for what it is. And it doesn't have to be deified, reified, sanctified. It's part of the world we live in. And listen, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a woman. So maybe all men are female texts. How about that for a conclusion? And listen, just for the sake of it, I just want to read a verse. And I'm going to stumble because my Irish is not great. And it's been so bloody long since I had any level of reasonable fluency. But I just want to sort of honour Doireann Ni Ghriofa's work as a bilingual poet. And I want to read a verse from her translation of Queen Artillery. And I'm going to read it in Irish, and I'll read the English translation she offers as well. And forgive me if there's anyone listening who's a fluent Irish speaker. Forgive my stumbles, but I just want you to hear the language because it's lovely. This is verse 7 from Doireann Ni Ghriofa's version of Eileen Dubna Gunnell's Cuoine Art Illyra, and it's her moment of realization that something terrible has happened to her man. And she says in Irish, Macharahu Gadangan is near credis riamh dod varv gur hánig cum de couple is a shrianta le gatolav is fuil de crí a lacan sheer gatilaf granta mar a miha id she is id shasav Hugus lame gatarsig, on Dara lame gata, on triu lame de couple. I think it's magical. Now I stumbled over a line there. I'm not going to revisit it. In English, what Doireann Ni Ghriofa offers us is, "Oh, my steady companion, never could I have believed you deceased, until she came to me, your steed, with her reins trailing the cobbles, and your heart's blood smeared from cheek to saddle, where you'd sit and even stand, my daredevil. 3 leaps I took, the first to the threshold, the second to the gate, the third to your mare." It's great. It's great stuff. Doireann Ni Ghriofa, fair play to you. It's brilliant. I love it. I couldn't recommend it enough. And Jennifer Fox, also brilliant. The Tale. And Greta Gerwig, also brilliant. Little Women. See those films if you haven't seen them. Read that book if you haven't read it. That's A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ni Ghriofa, Tramp Press from last year. And I intend to get it. I haven't read it yet, but I know it's out. It's her new collection of poetry, To Star the Dark, and that's from Daedalus Press. So go and get some poetry into you. Go and get some female texts into you. I hope to God I've made sense of all of this. I hope I've done these women and their work justice. Fair play. I love it all, and I am grateful. I'm grateful to be alive at this time, to enjoy those works of art, and to be in a place of receiving those female texts. So well done, those women. Keep it up. I look forward to more. And that is all. So thank you so much for listening. If you listened, thanks for sticking with it. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. I hope I've piqued your curiosity to check out those great works of art. I will be back next week with Christmas movies, I think. Next week I'm going to do my favourite Christmas movies. And remember, if you're enjoying what you hear, you can throw some love at the podcast on social media. You will find the links in the description. I will throw some links to some of the things I referenced today in the description also. And if you want to throw some financial support at this independent podcast, which is something I hope to make a going venture, financially speaking, eventually, you can do so using the supporter link in the description, wherever you're listening to the podcast, or at patreon.com/theclearout. Okay, so there you go. You take it easy and stay safe, stay well, stay warm and dry, roll with the storms. You can't fight that wind. And I will see you real soon. I'll be back next week with more. Okay, all the best. Take care. Mind yourselves. Bye-bye.